G'day mates, it's Busta here. So before the video begins, I just wanted to let you all know that I'm going to return to the long form content again. This means I'll be posting 1 or 2 longer videos a week with a compilation of true scary stories being featured. The reason for this is that, through my assessments, I've found that the longer you guys watch, the better the channel does. Plus, regardless of YouTube's algorithm, I don't want to lose my roots. This channel was built because of what we have here, and I don't want to lose that, for anything, even if it means taking a hit from the algorithm. So, if you want to support this channel and if you want to help this channel grow, please be sure to watch this video all the way through and feel free to go and watch more of my videos straight after this one to help out if you wish. Also, I've decided that I'm going to take my series stories over to Twitch permanently to diversify a little. So if you would like to listen to the series stories, please open a tab in your window by right-clicking the link to my Twitch account in the description below and hit the follow button to be notified of when I'm live streaming and when new videos are out. It's completely free to follow and make an account too. I also will likely be doing a scary story night live stream there too, where I'll be listening to stories, talking and having a nice night with all of you guys once a week. And if this sounds like something you would enjoy, be sure to follow me on Twitch. And finally guys, I want to do more subscriber stories and less Reddit stories moving forward. So if you want the chance to have your story featured on the channel, please send it through to my email, which is also in the description below. Thank you guys so much for all of your support. I hope you enjoy the video, and without further ado, let's begin. Ever since I was small, I've seen things or heard things. One incident I remember was when I was 6 years old. My family and I lived in apartments. I was taking a bath and playing with bubbles. I was sitting there doing my thing when I heard a creak. My younger sister, who was 3 at the time, was napping, so it couldn't have been her. And the bathroom door was already open, just in case I fell. It was a way of my mum keeping an eye on me so that she could run in and help me if I needed it. I looked at the small space between the wall and the door, and there was a body figure. I don't know why, but I thought it was my cousin, which doesn't make any sense because this thing was red. Just red with no face. The figure was small, like a child, and I was beaming with excitement because I could have sworn that it was my cousin. I quickly stood up and grabbed my towel and opened the door wide, and there was no one there. I walked around our small apartment, calling out his name. My mum yelled back, saying, "Gazelle, he isn't here. Do you want me to call your aunt to bring him?" I felt confused because I could have sworn I saw someone. No mummy, it's okay," I yelled and ran to my room, which I share with my older brother. At that particular time in my life, I hated being alone. I would hear whispers whenever I was awake and my older brother was asleep. Every now and then, I would run to his bed and beg him to let me sleep with him. And I also hated having the closet door open, because whenever it was, I always had these nightmares, and I would wake up and see a shadow. So fast forward to when I was 9, we moved into a bigger place because our school was pretty far away from where we used to live. I was staying at my grandma's place, who lives down the street from mine. Everyone in my family could honestly admit that they didn't feel comfortable there. I woke up in the middle of the night. My grandmother had a glass CD case, and in the reflection of it, I saw a figure staring back at me. This thing was completely black. I couldn't scream and I couldn't move. I laid frozen, not knowing what to do. Eventually, after blinking a few times, the thing just disappeared. I sat there looking around my room, but nothing was there. A few days later, my family and I finally unpacked our things. I don't know why I did this, but I grabbed a chair and placed it under the door frame. I felt the top surface of the door frame and I found a razor. There was dry blood on it. I was afraid and I placed it back. And the next day, I checked again, but it was gone. Things like this would happen often, things just disappearing and never being able to find them again. My little sister would also constantly hear voices. On one occasion, she asked my mum to tell the kids to stop laughing at her. It was 2 a.m. in the morning, and there was no one there. And the final experience I've had in that house was when I was maybe 10. I was sleeping on my bed and I opened my eyes. I was staring at the ceiling and I stopped breathing when I saw a shadow reaching for me. I wanted to cry, but I couldn't. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I could think of at the time and started praying. And when I opened them, it was gone again. After those experiences, nothing ever happened to me personally again. My sister stopped hearing those kids. I don't know what to think of these events, but the thing that really sticks out to me was that blade. I know I put it back up there, and I know that nobody else touched it, and it was gone. All of the other events in the house could be labeled as sleep paralysis or hallucinations, but I know that I put that blade back, and it went missing. To preface, I'm a 23-year-old male from West Virginia. This happened while I was a night shift cashier at a gas station in 2013, so I had just turned 19. The city I live in has about 10,000 people in it. It's not a very big place, and I've been here my whole life. It's the kind of place where homeless people, drug addicts, and drunks run rampant. But for the most part, it's a pretty decent place to raise a family. And overall, just about the most boring place in the world. The area where the gas station is located is just a little shady. There's an adjacent parking lot next to the gas pumps where homeless people beg for change and gather and drink. In my first week of working there, I ran a woman out of the bathroom trying to do heroin. I ran off a strange man, apparently trying to pick up 13-year-old girls. And there were more than a few empty threats thrown my way, courtesy of a couple of drunks that I refused to sell alcohol to, which I laughed off each time. That being said, I had grown accustomed to the dumbasses that shop there from time to time. I just got used to it. After about a month of working there, and being the only employee who was worth a shit, I had to work on my own from time to time. Honestly, I didn't think anything of it. But one particular slow fall night, a pale man in his early 30s with a grey hoodie, black sweatpants, and tan unlaced boots walked in. This guy looked like hell. Sores all over his face, rotten teeth, and dilated eyes. Needless to say, he gave me the fucking creeps. He glanced at me with a cold, dead, emotionless expression and continued about the store, browsing the 3 different aisles of snacks and car accessories. All in all, he stumbled around for 2 or 3 minutes, his hands deep in his hoodie pockets the whole time. He quickly hurried out of the door and he was gone. I assumed he'd stolen something to eat, but at that point, I didn't really care. The guy was really fucking weird, and I wasn't about to get stabbed over a fucking Twinkie. Plus, I was close to quitting anyway, as my manager had turned out to be a real asshole. I ultimately dismissed it and finished my shift, not telling anyone. The very next day, I was scheduled on a 3:11 shift, and I went to work. The afternoon went peacefully. A few old people, a couple of cute girls, and a guy in a suit in a hurry. Not many people came in that evening though, which wasn't a shocker as it was getting pretty late. Then, at around 9 o'clock, out in the distance, I could see that familiar grey hoodie. The man from the previous day had come walking down the street, hand shoved in his pockets, head towards the door. He pushed it open and looked at me with the same dead stare. The bell on the door was the only sound in an otherwise completely silent moment. He went right back to business, browsing the aisle. A few minutes later, he comes up to the counter holding a small bottle of water with $2 between the fingers of the same hand, just staring at me. His right hand never once left his pocket. I rang him up silently and handed him his change. He stood there for about 10 seconds, quietly, not taking his cold eyes off of me. Then, in a very foreboding, deep voice, he says, "You need to call the police." My heart sank. I thought I was about to get blown away. Excuse me?" I replied, confused. You need to call the police." Then, as quickly as he finished repeating himself, he walked out of the door. With my heart beating out of my chest, and without hesitation, I took that advice really fucking quickly. I locked all of the doors and went back and called the police. A squad car came quickly and a few older officers, and I gave a statement. I quit not long after that, having finally had it with my manager and all the drunks and drug addicts. I never heard anything from the police concerning the pale man in the hoodie, and I never saw him again. I've done a lot of thinking since then, and the only explanation I can think of is that maybe he knew of someone that wanted to rob the place, and maybe he stopped it from happening or something. Maybe he got the cops there just in time to scare anyone else away that may have been waiting for the right opportunity. Maybe he saved my life. I like to think that maybe that's what happened, although I can't help but wonder why his hand never left his hoodie pocket. I'll start off with a little bit of background. I'm currently 24, married with 2 daughters, and my wife is pregnant. I'm a local truck driver in Houston, delivering lumber to mostly new residential construction sites. I'm 6 feet tall, between 180 and 190 pounds. I'm 3/4 white and 1/4 American Indian. I'm the oldest of my great-grandfather's 40-plus great-grandchildren, which means I've learned all of our history, secrets and legends that only my tribe's elders can tell you. So, my experience was on the 20th of July, 2012. It was a Friday night and I was 19 at the time, and I didn't have many responsibilities other than delivering a pizza part-time. So naturally, being a teenager, I was out with friends at a house party in Old Caddy. It's a suburb west of Houston, Texas. My friend Brennan had gotten well past drunk at this stage, and once he was starting to behave recklessly, I decided it was time to leave the party and take him home. He didn't want me to take him home, so instead, he asked me to drive him to one of his friends' houses that I'm not too familiar with. This friend, who I only remember as Joey, lived on the far west outskirts of Caddy. I took a road called Morton Road to get there. We rode with the driver and the passenger windows down so Brennan could get some fresh air. The street is one turn off of Morton, called Bartlett. My sense of direction is pretty good, and I remember this because I've delivered pizzas all through Caddy, and have since become a local truck driver in Houston. Bartlett had 3 or 4 houses on the right side, and on the west side was a fairly large forest area, maybe 40 acres or so, and there was a dead end just past the last house. I had noticed the moon was full before I even went out that night, and vaguely noted it as I got to Joey's house. It was the second house on the right, and I parked my car on the left side of the road, closest to the trees. I helped Brennan get out of my car and walked him to the porch. Joey came out and thanked me for dropping him off, and we said goodbye. I decided to smoke a cigarette before I left the road after all of that. At the time, I shared my car with my dad, and his number 1 rule was to not smoke in his car. After lighting my cigarette, it didn't take long to notice that the road was eerily silent. I assumed that I didn't notice it before as I was helping my noisy drunk friend get inside the house. Maybe 3 steps into my cigarette, I heard heavy footsteps going across the gravel, maybe 100 feet in front of me. I was alarmed at the sound they made because it was similar to the sound of pulling something metal across concrete. So here I am, alone, standing on a dark road under a full moon, and I hear something big walking too close for comfort in front of me. I didn't hesitate to throw down my cigarette and get into my car. I told myself as I was getting in that I wouldn't turn on my headlights so I wouldn't have to see what was in front of me, and simply reverse my way back onto Morton Road and get the hell out of there. Unfortunately for me, my car had automatic lights that turned on as soon as I started the car. A fact that I was aware of, but in my panic seemed to ignore. Immediately in front of me, at about 100 feet, was a 6.5 to 7 foot beast on 2 legs. It was covered in black fur, with the body of a gym-addicted man and the head of what I guess could be similar to a German shepherd or a black wolf. It had human-like feet covered in dark fur, as well as large claws sticking out about 2 inches, and it held its left hand out the same way a human would be reaching for something in front of him or her. I noticed that the fingers ended in large claws as well. While this was enough to cause my jaw to drop, what got me the most was that it was wearing torn blue jeans that seemed too tight and unnaturally torn, and an open flannel blue shirt that was ripped at its bulky shoulders. It looked my way when the lights revealed it and glared at me with narrow yellow eyes bearing its large fangs. My windows were still down and I hadn't touched my radio, so I had no trouble hearing the loud growl it let out. It then turned its head to the forest, dropped on all fours and ran out of sight into the trees. All of this took place in what I can guess was about 20 seconds, but honestly, it felt like hours. At this point, I literally had tears in my eyes, but I didn't hesitate for 1 second longer to shove my car into reverse and put the gas pedal to the metal. I heard a loud growling and grunting as I was leaving. I reversed into Morton Road and went 80 to 90 miles an hour down the streets leading back to Caddy, and didn't slow down till I was on Interstate 10. While still on Morton Road, I kept my eyes in front of me and sobbed the whole time because I had never been so scared in my life. I could have sworn that the look I got from this creature was communicating to me that I had no business seeing him, and that he wanted me gone. The look reminded me of criminals on TV being caught in their wrongdoings and wanting to cause harm to those who witnessed it. I got home, ran inside and called my Scottish Terrier into my room, and didn't sleep till the sun was up. To this day, I've never had a desire nor the nerve to go back to that part of Morton Road. I obsessed over the idea that I had seen a werewolf, and researched werewolf sightings on Google, and was intrigued by the Beast of Bray Road and Michigan Dogman sightings, and everything else that came up. I was disappointed to see that nothing I found on the web was precisely what I saw. While the beasts that others had encountered did seem similar, none of them were spotted wearing clothes. I told my mother and father what I had seen, and while my mother could tell I was being genuine, my father was more interested in me driving that far from home without letting him know, so I just stopped talking about it. Of the 7 people outside of my family that I've told, only my now wife and one friend seemed to believe me, most laughing and asking stupid questions such as, "Did you ask the werewolf if he got the vampires yet?" and similar things like that. I know my story sounds pretty far-fetched, especially considering the fact that I couldn't find any other reported sightings near the Houston area, nor much in Texas recently either. And because of this, I never submitted my encounter online because I was scared of being ridiculed. Or, to be honest, scared if I did say my story that somehow the creature would find out and hunt me down. I'm positive that I'll never stop being haunted by the memory of this creature. It's just too vivid and too frightening to put out of my mind. I also never told Brennan, the friend that I dropped off there that night, what I saw. In fact, I didn't see him again for 2 years until accidentally bumping into him at a gas station in South Caddy. My grandmother took an interest in my encounter though, and told me the legend of our tribe's skinwalkers and the cursed enemies, which is really interesting and really disturbing. I'm not able to give much detail out of respect for my tribe, but I'll say this. Our skinwalkers are very different than the Navajo tribe's tales. They would transform into either bears or werewolves when wars would break out. Once the leader of their enemies were caught, the skinwolf, our nickname, would bite and infect them, damning them to become a half-wolf monster on the full moon, similar to most werewolf legends. Our ancestors' spirits are most powerful and prominent during the full moon, and it is them who would force our enemies into their transformation. The curse would be passed down for every oldest male of each new generation of the cursed enemy's descendants. I normally would call all of this bullshit or just a scary story, but after the night of my sighting and what followed 4 years later, let's just say that I've opened my mind a bit. Last summer, 2016, my mum and fiance, now wife, went shopping at Barnes & Noble and noticed a book by an author who was a cryptozoologist and who I followed on social media in case of hearing anything similar to my experience, and thought I'd like it. I couldn't put it down, and after reading a chapter where a woman in Tennessee saw a clothed creature, I decided that after 4 years of hesitating, it was time to write to her. She believed my story and told me about a lot of people reporting things similar to mine, and I let her in on my tribe's legends to give us both an angle that we hadn't considered as far as learning what this creature was. It's been months since our last conversation, and unfortunately, my horror wasn't over. On September 16 of 2016, I was delivering lumber to a new neighborhood in Caddy, right near that fucking place, Bartlett Road. The way it's set up is that you've got Avenue D and Bartlett Road, the road of my encounter, running parallel to each other, with Franz Road cut off, connecting them in between, which is where I was en route to a new developing neighborhood and blew out my tire. My work truck doesn't come with a spare, so I had to call my boss to send a service truck out to replace my tire. All I could do was sit there and wait. I smoked about 3 cigarettes, listening to horror stories on YouTube, and started working on some lyrics. I'm a songwriter. When a truck came down the darkening road, I assumed it was the tire guy, but the truck was an old and beat up, probably 98 model Ford F-150, red with a single cab. The truck slowed as it came by my truck, and he rolled his window down. I didn't pay much attention to him, but I looked up in his direction. His face was hidden, but in a rougher, quiet voice, he asked, "Hey bud, is everything alright? Anything I can help with?" I said, "I've got a service truck due here in about 5 minutes from now to fix my tire. I really appreciate your concern and courtesy though. Thanks." The man then turned his head sharply towards me and sniffed the air, then smiled, revealing really yellow teeth, with canines that honestly looked like fangs of a vampire or something. But what freaked me out the most was that the son of a bitch was wearing a blue flannel shirt with patches on the shoulders. My eyes were widened in shock, and his smile grew more sinister as he said, "I remember you." "What?" I stammered. "I remember you." He growled loudly in a demonic voice, and his eyes, I shit you not, turned yellow. The tire truck came down the road at that moment, and the man looked annoyed, but still very satisfied with himself. He looked at me, his eyes normal and his teeth just yellow but not sharp anymore, and said, "See you around, Blake." I almost pissed myself right then and there, hearing him say my name. I got his license plate number, but I didn't call it in. I mean, what the hell do I say to the cops? Yeah, this dude just drove by and freaked me out, and I think he's a werewolf because his shirt has the same one I saw 4 years ago. I mean, honestly, who would believe that? It just wasn't an option. I haven't seen the man since then, and I still refuse to go out on the night of a full moon. It's just not worth the risk to me. I know most people won't believe me, but I honestly couldn't care less if you do or don't. I know what I saw, and I am not crazy. The stuff of legends isn't just legends. This, for me at least, has proved to me that the world we know is full of things that we can never possibly understand. I honestly believe that I was really lucky to survive. So I've been wanting to get this off my chest for quite some time now. I guess simply because, in retrospect, years later, this entire experience didn't sit well with me at all, and after listening to countless B videos, I felt it was time. This community, and B, you guys are awesome, and make my less exciting days at work and elsewhere that much more interesting and enthralling. Anyway, let's begin. Back in what must have been right after I graduated high school, in my first year of college, so maybe 2004-05, I began some underage drinking and get-togethers with as many friends as possible, and did some really stupid and or destructive stuff. An old friend of mine that I met in my senior year of high school got his own apartment and some roommates. This instantly made him the coolest guy in our group of friends, since all of us had yet to make enough money to move out, nor did any of us really care to, since we were all about 18 or 19 years old at the time. So, my friend's name was Tyson. I haven't spoken to him in years, and he and I kind of had a messy falling out of. It was because he tried to sleep with my then girlfriend. Real stand-up guy, I know. Anyway, one alcohol-induced evening, a group of about 8 of us decided to go exploring in this supposed messed up haunted area, just outside of a quiet yet well-populated city in Orange County, California. The city is called Irvine. Irvine is your typical upper middle class city that's somewhat known for a few reasons. Number 1, the city was, as I mentioned before, very quiet, very safe, and harbored a pretty prestigious medical university. You may even have heard of it, the University of Irvine, or, as some more racist assholes nicknamed it, the University of Chinese Immigrants, due to the fact that the college had many Asian students. It was kind of prejudiced and dickish, I know, but that aside, it was actually a fairly accurate description of its student body. Anyhow, another acquaintance of mine, his name's Billy, he looked some info up on his then state-of-the-art desktop computer, that this area was known for some pretty bizarre activity. Things like cults, haunted figures appearing and then disappearing, violent acts on its non-residents, and even some alleged murders were reported in this forum page that we all huddled around and read as a group, many of which were said to have happened due to the safe nature and perception of the city. A lot of people were led to believe that the violent activity and alleged murders were kept a secret and kept under wraps by local authorities. Kind of like that movie Hot Fuzz with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. Which, by the way, if you haven't seen the movie, first off, go and see it, because it's fucking awesome. And secondly, I won't go into details about the film to spare the people who haven't seen it yet of any spoilers. But yeah, after you've seen the movie, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about. As Billy researches this region of the city, which lies just a few miles outside of the college town that had more residential, commercial and mainstream restaurants and retail outlets, we all start to get really excited. Maybe it was the drunken thought process all of us had sloshing around inside of us at the time, or simply the natural human instinct we all had within us to check something out that sounded so fucked up in such a seemingly perfect city just a short distance away, or just sheer boredom. But we all got ourselves ready and headed out. I should note that this particular part of the city had a different name, Black Star Canyon. Apparently the area got its name from an old Native American Indian tribe that used to dwell there that was at some point mass slaughtered by a group of Spanish settlers some 200 or 300 years back. That part of the story we didn't know, and to this day, myself or any of my friends had yet to research the legitimacy of the tragedy. But after my experience that night, I wouldn't doubt the truth of it for a second now. We pile into my friend Chris's 97 Ford Explorer and Tyson's later-to-be ex-wife's brand new Volkswagen Jetta. It was a total chick car, I know, but we headed out to the desolate and oddly creepy part of the city. I pile into Chris's Explorer since he and I were better friends and knew that I was likely to have a better time in his vehicle. Chris was also a little smarter than the rest of us, and if any shit were to go down, I trusted his judgment much more than anyone else we were there with. After about 15 to 20 minutes of driving, we arrive. One thing we all notice as we draw closer and closer to the epicenter of the region is that, slowly but surely, there were randomly less and less cars driving the streets, hardly any streetlights, and the houses in the area were more and more spread out. I guess it wasn't that strange, given the overall aesthetic of the town. But what was strange was that, just a few minutes before that, there were plenty of your run-of-the-mill businesses and restaurants like McDonald's, Target and Walmart. But then, all of a sudden, it was like we entered a whole other part of the city or something. Another thing we all started to notice, since this was about the time when anyone and everyone was carrying a cell phone, was that all of us, with our various cell phone providers, had all lost service to our phones. Many of us had Verizon, and within about 5 minutes of entering the area, our phones all began losing bars, until they all said across the screen, no service. One friend that was riding with us in the Explorer, Nick, had Sprint as his provider, and boasted to the rest of us that his phone was more superior, since it took a bit longer for his phone to lose service. After about 5 minutes of driving up into the hilly farmland, however, he too lost service to his phone. We all laughed it off, but I think all of us deep down found it a little bit concerning that if anything were to happen to us while we were there was really no way that we could phone for help, even the police. We read online that there were a few locations in particular that we should check out for a good scare. The first was supposedly this Protestant church located in the lesser populous part of town. After about 15 minutes of trying to find this church, none of us could piece together which one it was, and with only a small bit of knowledge about which one it was, we threw in the towel on that whole idea. Another location we read about was this abandoned farmhouse and barn off the highway once you pass through the main part of town. This was a little easier for us to find. I couldn't tell you how we came across it or how we knew which one it was, since there were so many of them to begin with, but somehow we all seemed to figure it out. We pulled our vehicles to the side of the road, and my good friend Chris became overly excited and removed an old handheld digital camera from its case out of the trunk of the car. He carried this thing everywhere, and still to this day carries some sort of state-of-the-art camera on him at all times. I'm sure if I could remember the exact model of that thing today, it would be laughable at how lacking and technologically advanced it would be, compared to what is simply on even the most basic of smartphones today. But this was 2005, and that sort of technology didn't exist in our pockets just yet. Nor did any sort of social media, besides maybe MySpace, exist. So it's not like any of us could just post about our whereabouts or if we wanted to brag about our dangerous venture into the alleged haunted part of this city unknown. My friend Chris fired up the camera and started filming our experience. The first thing he begins to document is one of our buddies who, seemingly out of nowhere, begins losing his shit. This particular friend of ours, Ramos, was a little more religious than the rest of us, and the idea of where we were, I guess, really started to sink in, and as a result, he started to go ballistic. My friend Chris and I found this to be kind of funny, filming his little freakout and poking fun at his antics along the way. But it seemed like out of nowhere that he became a totally different person. Ramos was always known in the group as one of the funny ones, who, despite his heavy religious upbringing, always had crass or inappropriate jokes or stories to share. He was also always known as the one in the group who always developed some kind of inside joke that only our group of friends would get or play along with. So this was all very odd behavior from him. It was almost like something had overtaken him. Not like in a possession of any kind, because he still acted like himself to a certain degree, but it was definitely not a side of him any of us had seen before. I mean, he began sobbing uncontrollably, violently punching the back seat of Chris's car, and pleading with us to take him back home just moments after we parked outside of that farmhouse. He began saying things about how the place is cursed and there were devil worshippers here and murderous cults in the area, and how his mum always warned him of this place and never to come here, because in his words, this was the playground of the devil himself and we're all going to die tonight. After a while, we didn't really know what to do about the situation. All of us couldn't help but wonder, then why on earth would you agree to come here? And then just freak out now when we just arrive? I mean, he seemed fine the whole way up here. And like I said, this whole apeshit behavior came out of left field. My friend Chris still has the recording somewhere in his mix of thousands upon thousands of recordings. And it can be seen and heard in the video we took of him that he's genuinely terrified. Terrified to the point where he looked as if that night would be the last night on Earth, for all of us. Over and over again, he just screamed, "Please, I beg you, take me home, I beg you." None of us took the cries of desperation seriously, and just kind of humoured at the fact that he was acting so out of character, and at the way he repeatedly used the word beg. Today, we all jokingly repeat and mimic his voice, at the way he said beg, instead of properly enunciating the word as he normally would. So being the jerks that we all were, we ignored his pleas and continued in towards the farmhouse. Mortified at the idea of being left behind, he again pleaded for us to not go into the house and to just go. Eventually, my friend and I convinced him to go and said that we would only be in there for a few minutes and that he'd probably be a lot safer with all of us instead of in the car alone along the side of the sketchy empty highway. Reluctantly, he finally agrees and steps out of the SUV, not saying a word from that point. The group of about 7 or 8 of us, 5 or 6 guys and 2 girls, approach the outer perimeter of the farmhouse and cross through a tiny barbed wire fence with signs that read, "Trespass and keep out, will be shot on sight," etc. I'll admit, I became a little wary of our decision to enter this seemingly abandoned property at this point. Not necessarily because of the fear of being, as Ramos put it, the devil's playground, because I didn't really believe in that sort of thing, but the reality of us, myself or any of us, potentially being shot if we were spotted by whoever might still own this decrepit piece of land we were now trespassing on. I kept silent due to the fact that I didn't want to be poked fun at like my other friend had been shortly beforehand, and because the girl that would later become Tyson's wife was absolutely gorgeous, and I had a huge crush on her and wanted to look fearless and cool in front of her. For the record, this girl, Jill, was still single at this point, and the relationship between she and Tyson hadn't even remotely begun. This was all about a year before the drama between us and my eventual girlfriend later down the line, but that's a whole other story as well. Being that this was well before any of us had flashlights tethered to our cell phones, only 2 of us were carrying flashlights, guiding us through the rundown farm. The area was, without a doubt, creepy and a little unsettling, but myself and none of the others sensed any real danger as we approached the old farmhouse and barn on the 4 to 5 acres of land our group crept along. Then, like some shitty horror movie cliche, the other girl in our group suggests that we split up. One half of the group go and explore the farmhouse, the other check out the barn. I wasn't a fan of this idea because I really thought that we should see everything on that piece of land together, since there could have been something of interest in either 2 of the structures. At this point in time, I'm feeling more inclined to see what felt safer to me, and decided to join the group heading towards the barn. Each of the groups brought a flashlight, and another friend of ours at the time, whose name I can't remember now, revealed that he had brought an aluminium baseball bat just to be safe. None of us thought it would be a bad idea, but there was now going to be 2 separate groups, and only one had a baseball bat. So we decided that the other group, the one headed for the farmhouse, bring the bat. I guess it was slightly further away and looked to be a little more creepy and dangerous to all of us, I guess. We split up into even groups and we head for the barn. I walk second in line behind my friend Chris, and the other girl Erin, and my now not so hysterical friend Ramos. Naturally, he chose the perceived safer location to explore, and took to the back line to better protect himself in some way or another. Once we arrived at the barn, Chris and I quickly swung open the awkward barn door. It crept open slowly as we pushed hard against it, but it hardly budged. From the outside, the barn looked like it had been abandoned for years, and it became much more apparent to us that the door became caught on the overgrowth of dead grass and weeds that engulfed the door, which answered the question as to why the door was so difficult to pry open, making it feel so awkward. Once inside, I saw what was one of the most terrifying sights I'd ever laid my eyes on. Chris's flashlight illuminated the barn nicely, but on the other side of the barn was what I guess was a weathered down wall to the barn. It was as if someone had either busted one of the walls down, or nature had taken its course and tore the walls down at the back end of it. As spooky as it was, this did, however, give us some extra light to see into the barn that much more clearly, and what we saw in that barn, I don't think any of us will ever forget. Hanging from various hooks and rafters was a random assortment of animal slaughtering tools. Dozens upon dozens hung on the walls of the barn everywhere, like whoever owned the barn previously had left in a hurry and didn't bother to collect the very expensive tools and just left them there. But that wasn't the worst part. Along with the various knives, hooks, and killing devices was graffiti. A lot of graffiti everywhere, but not your typical everyday kind of graffiti, advertising what would normally be a logo or artistically drawn out gang letters. The writing was occult-like and what seemed to be satanic in a sense. Some of it was recognizable and generic, things like pentagrams and the number 666 written across some of the walls, but others weren't so recognizable. I am the first one to speak up out of my group of friends, and say what any 19-year-old would say when he's presented with such a bizarre artwork. "What the fuck?" My friend Chris replies, jokingly, "This kind of looks like my room, huh?" All of us laugh, besides Ramos, who was now totally stricken with fear at what he was seeing. He was seeing exactly what he was afraid of. Something had happened here, and all of us knew right away that it was probably not a safe place for us to be exploring anymore. We press on, however, and flash our light into a pile of what looks to be chicken feathers and blood. Lots and lots of blood, everywhere. We had no idea if it was from a human or an animal, but someone or something had obviously been killed in that barn, and it had to have been recently. The blood looked really fresh, wet and sticky. There were no indications that it had dried even a little bit. As you can probably imagine, Ramos became petrified at this point. He began saying things like, "Fuck this, let's go, please." Aaron and I at this point were now siding with Ramos. Seeing this display of a recent sacrifice or some kind of cult ritual and its aftermath was enough for us to want to nope the hell out of there as well. Chris, however, wasn't afraid and immediately began saying that the blood was fake, or it was red paint or some stupid shit like that, because he wanted to, I don't know, catch something even more insane on his little camera, or even get a greater thrill out of the whole experience. Who knows? Chris is a different sort of person, and to this day, he still is. I've always said that in a zombie apocalypse, he's the first person I'd call. The guy knew how to keep a level head in even the most fucked up of situations, but sometimes his fearlessness got us into trouble as a result of this. Before we could all democratically decide to leave the barn, we heard a loud yell from our other group of friends who had been investigating the farmhouse. It was something along the lines of "Go, run, get the fuck out of here." It was Tyson. I'm not sure who he was addressing the calls to, but right then, we just assumed that it was directed to all of us, and by that point, we unanimously decided without saying anything to each other that we should do the same. Tyson was known for playing jokes on people and lying a lot, but in the type of situation we had now put ourselves in, and after what we had just seen in that barn, he probably wasn't messing around with us this time, and none of us wanted to take any chances. As quickly as we all could, we left the barn, quickly running back in the direction that we came. Adrenaline was coursing through me, pumping every last bit of it into my heart, legs, brain, everywhere I needed it to be to get the fuck out of that piece of farmland as quickly as possible. Once outside, we didn't see Tyson or anyone else in his group. We didn't hear them either. There were no loud footsteps, no voices, no ruckus of a group of people cutting through bushes and tall weeds that surrounded the property of the farm. We all kept pace with one another. Chris and I were in the lead. Directly behind us, Ramos and Aaron kept up as best as they could. I turned around to look at them, and what I saw in the distance, beyond them, illuminated by the half-full moon above us, I'll never forget. What I saw was a man dressed in what had to have been all white, just standing there, watching us run. It was way too dark for me to see a face or make out any specific features, but there was most definitely someone there. If it wasn't for the full moon above us that night, or the choice of colour he had on, I probably would have never have seen him. I don't know if he was dangerous or what his intentions were, or if he simply owned the fucked up cult farm we had been exploring. But when I looked in front of me for a moment to make sure I wasn't running head into a tree or Chris, I quickly whipped my head back around to try and catch a glimpse of the white-dressed figure, and, to my surprise, he was gone. It would have had to have been only mere seconds, but he had completely vanished. I feared the worst at this point. I thought maybe he'd taken off to get a vehicle to chase us, or went in to inform others that could have been with him about my friends and I trespassing. I truly began to feel like whoever or whatever this man was doing there, it wasn't going to end well for any of us if he took any sort of action against us. What was really strange though was that he didn't say a word. If he was the owner of the farm or had an issue with us being there, wouldn't he just have said something? Wouldn't he have just told us to get the fuck out of there? Or said something like, "You better run"? But he didn't. He just stared at us and watched us run away in fear. Finally, after what felt like running for hours through the farmland property, we reached the barbed wire fence. I don't say anything to my friends about the man in the white, and I just assume at the time that maybe my eyes had just played tricks on me. To our surprise, once we climb our way out past the fence, we see in the distance both vehicles, and then another vehicle. At first, I feel my heart drop into my stomach. That is, until after drawing closer, we see that it's a police cruiser, and beside it, we see a lone officer standing there and the other half of the group being detained in handcuffs. We quickly approach, but do so as not to startle the officer and accidentally have him put a bullet into one of us. The policeman sees us and flashes a bright light on us and yells at us to stay where we are. We comply, all four of us, leaning up against the Volkswagen Jetta, making ourselves look as harmless as we can. The officer then begins lecturing all of us about the crime we had just committed and threatens to arrest us on trespassing charges. We all have a heavy weight of despair start to weigh down on us now, thinking that we're all going to jail for the first time. But then, instead of handcuffing and detaining all of us and calling for backup or whatever, he begins telling us what he'd seen happen in the area and that we're lucky to be alive. A wave of shock and disbelief crashes over me. Lucky to be alive? I thought. He then went on to say that lately he's seen a lot of violent and cult-like activity in the area, and even though it isn't usually publicized in the media, the area we had decided to roam around in was known for many disappearances, cult activity, possible murders, and so forth. He told us that this area was no joke, and that we should never come back. For our own good, he said. He then went on to tell us that if any of our other friends had thought about joyriding or exploring Black Star Canyon anytime soon, during the late hours in particular, that they should rethink their actions and to remember what he was telling us in that moment. He said that he saw our vehicles and waited for us to emerge from the farmland, thinking that we might have had something to do with the recent illicit activity that had been going on around the area. When he saw that we were just some stupid college kids looking for a thrill, he knew that we were just one group of many who had done the same, exploring the area in hopes of a cheap thrill or whatever. He then went on to say that if he saw any of us here again, that he wouldn't hesitate to bring us in and press charges. Needless to say, we all listened and never went back. When I asked Tyson and the other half of the group what they had ran off from, he told me that they had found similar graffiti, blood, and dead animals scattered across a basement that they had entered on the side of the house. But it wasn't until they saw a man, dressed in all white, standing in that basement, that they all took off running. I told the men that I saw the man just staring at us as we ran off, and gave a vague description, matching what he and his group had seen as well. The thought of it gave me chills down my spine, and to this very day, it still resonates within me. I often wonder if we hadn't have run off or come into contact with that police officer, if any of us would still be here today to tell the story that I'm telling right now. I felt eternally grateful from that day forward that we all left that place without a single scratch. I guess it kind of goes without saying that this was the last time that I ever went exploring an allegedly dangerous and or haunted place like Black Star Canyon ever again.